Today we will be celebrating a Lessons and Carols type service. We're going through the Misfit genealogy of Jesus Christ as it comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew. We're looking at it also through the lens, because we have to have fun with it as well, to the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which is one that is always on repeat, I think, for all of us every year. The movie was first released in 1964 and is an iconic Christmas movie. I've watched it at least once a year, maybe twice, for my entire life. And certainly my opinion of it has changed over the years, and there's a lot of lines that we could maybe say haven't aged very well. But the story endures. And I think the reason that the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer endures and continues to be with us every Christmas and Advent season is because we are really drawn to stories about outcasts who become heroes. My favorite part of the movie is when Rudolph and Hermie and Yukon Cornelius make it to the island of Misfit toys. And there they meet others who don't fit into society's expectations. There's a cowboy who rides an ostrich, a spotted elephant, an airplane that can't fly, a train with square wheels, and a dolly who's rejected. And each resident of the island of Misfit toys represent those who don't fit society's expectations. Surprisingly, I'm always surprised by this, Rudolph's story is only 83 years old. It was first published in 1939 in the Montgomery Ward catalog as a poem. It's only 83 years old. But the story of miracles coming from misfits, well, that's thousands of years old. And that's, as another Christmas character likes to say, what Christmas is all about. Miracles from misfits is the essence of the Christmas story. And so this Advent, we're going to use this theme of the island of misfit toys as a jumping off point to explore what we're calling the stable of misfit joys. And each week we're going to honor the misfits and the outcasts and the surprising people who God chose to usher in the birth of Jesus Christ. Today we are going to look at the misfit genealogy of Christ. Because the entire New Testament begins with this very long list of names that we tend to skip right over. I mean, they are hard to pronounce, after all. But Matthew begins with this name list, reminding us that this entire story didn't just begin with Jesus. It began so much earlier than that, because God had been working for generations and generations and generations to bring Christ into the world. Matthew lists Jesus' ancestors from Abraham all the way down to Mary and Joseph. And it's quite a list of characters. Wise and obedient men who faithfully follow God. Strong and resilient women who stand tall in the face of adversity. It's a long list of liars and truth tellers, foreigners and farmers, peasants and kings. And each one a descendant of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So this morning, we're going to read each name, and we're going to pause at a few that stand out. And for each pause in this misfit family tree, we're going to light a candle to remember them and those who walk in their footsteps today. But we're going to begin first by hearing their names. So if you have your song sheet, let's bring that out, and we're going to hear them sung in song. This is Matthew Begets by Andrew Peterson.
Sarah came from Judas, one, say,
much better than me reading all those names, I think.
We light a first candle for hope.
And now can we hear that Jesus' family tree stands thousands of years. For thousands of years, God's people lived in hope for the coming of the Messiah, the Savior.
Thousands of years later, we still hopefully wait for God to act.
We wait for God's light to shine bright today. We light one candle for all generations before us and after us who have lived in hope.
Our second light is for Tamar. Tamar is found in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. An account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. We pause here at the name of Tamar, a feminine name after a long list of male names. We all know the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's 12 sons, the fourth of which was Judah. This is the first place in the genealogy of Jesus that makes us pause and wonder, what is God doing here? Because genealogies in the ancient Near East always followed a male line. But Jesus' family tree is not an old boys' club. Among these names are 5 women, but they're not the names we expect to hear our biblical mothers in the faith, Sarah or Rebecca or Rachel. Instead, we hear Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. All of them misfits. You can read Tamar's story in full in Genesis 38, but if you remember, she is not Judah's wife, although she is listed here as the mother of 2 boys, Perez and Zerah. No, Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law, his daughter-in-law. Tamar was married to Judah's son who had died, and according to Hebrew law, she was to be cared for by marrying another member of Judah's family. But Judah instead sent her away back to her father's house, where she could find no place for herself, which was a terrifying prospect in the ancient world. If a woman in those days wasn't a wife or a mother, she might very well find herself on the streets. And Judah had put her in that position. He had refused to marry her and forgot about her. And so, abused by the one who was meant to protect her, Tamar posed as a prostitute, and she tricked Judah, unveiling his sin and demanding that he do the right thing by her. Tamar was an ancestor of Jesus Christ, a clever woman who persevered. And today we remember her persistence, and we light a candle for all those in our day who persevere in the face of adversity, who fight righteously for their rights and for the rights of others. So let us light a candle for those who persevere. The third light is for Rahab. Rahab comes in verse 5 of Matthew's first chapter. Verse 5 reads, "And Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab." So we pause here at the name of Rahab. Like her sisters in this ancestral line, Rahab is an outsider. You can read Rahab's full story in Joshua chapter 2, where she helps the Israelites conquer the city of Jericho when the walls come a-tumbling down. But those walls never would have tumbled if it wasn't for Rahab. She hid 2 Israelite spies on the roof of her house, and she saved their lives from attack from her king, the king of Jericho. Rahab is a foreigner who comes to believe in the God of the Israelites. And in saving their lives, God saves her and her family. When the Israelites take the city of Jericho and the attack occurs, Rahab hangs a red cord out her window, marking her family's house as a safe house. Rahab, an ancestor of Jesus Christ, was a foreign woman who saved God's people. Today we remember Rahab, and we light a candle for all the outsiders and immigrants and foreigners in our day who live lives of courage. We light a candle for the outsiders. Our fourth light is for Ruth. And Ruth is mentioned in the latter half of verse 5, where Matthew says, "And Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth." We can hear Ruth's full story in a book of her own name, a 4-chapter book. But I want to read a few verses from Ruth chapter 1, and I'm going to read verses 16 through 19. But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me. More as well, even if death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said no more to her, and the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. Though the grass may wither and the flowers may fade, the word of our Lord endures forever. So we pause here at the name of Ruth. She was a daughter-in-law to Naomi, and they shared grief when tragedy hit their family, killing the 3 men, the father and the 2 sons. And it was in her grief that Naomi decided to return home to Bethlehem, leaving behind her now widowed daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, in their home country of Moab. Orpah listened to Naomi and she stayed. But Ruth stayed with Naomi. Ruth went back to Bethlehem. I love the words here from chapter 1 that Ruth says to her mother-in-law. We often hear this text read at weddings as the binding of two people together. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. But this is not a declaration of romantic love. It's a declaration of familial love, of sisterly love, of friendship, of a tie that binds two friends together. Ruth is Naomi's companion. She proclaims that she will go with her and watch over her and care for her. And in fact, in this 4-chapter book, we hear an entire story of how Ruth cares for Naomi through thick and thin. And Ruth becomes the mother of Obed and the grandmother of Jesse, which means she was the great-grandmother of King David himself. King David, who was born in Bethlehem 1,000 years before Christ. Ruth was an ancestor of Jesus Christ, an immigrant, and a devoted friend. Today, as we remember Ruth, we light a candle for all those companions who have walked alongside us in the faith. A light for our companions. Our fifth light is for Bathsheba. Bathsheba's name is found in Matthew's genealogy in verse 6, where Matthew says, "And Jesse, the father of King David, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah." And so we pause here at the description of a woman who is not named. Instead, Matthew implies her name by her story. David, the father of Solomon, by the wife of Uriah. We know her as Bathsheba. We find Bathsheba's story in 2 Samuel 11, when King David sees her bathing on the roof. David rapes Bathsheba and then murders her husband Uriah. Crimes for which God will hold David accountable for the rest of his life. And so Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, is the victim of two crimes and has a sorrow that we can barely name or describe. With Bathsheba's name alongside David's and just before a long list of kings, God asks us to pause at her story, to remember her sorrow and to see her pain, and to know that God walks with all those who suffer these crimes today. Bathsheba is in fact the mother of Solomon. She's the mother of wisdom, an ancestor of Jesus Christ, and a beacon of light for all those who have been victimized. And so today we remember Bathsheba, and we light a candle for all the victims and all the survivors. Our sixth light is for the kings. Matthew now lists the names of 14 kings from the time of Solomon to the time of Jeconiah. He lists the kings of Israel from the time of the United Kingdom with Solomon, to the divided kingdoms with Rehoboam and Abijah, to the fall of Israel by Assyria with Ahaz and Hezekiah, and finally to the fall of Judea and Jerusalem by Babylon with King Jeconiah. These are the names we hear from the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, the names of leaders who led in both righteousness and corruption, all of them good and bad and wise and destructive, are ancestors of Jesus Christ. Today, as we remember the kings, we light a candle for the leaders of the nations today. We pray they may lead with wisdom and righteousness. The seventh light, the people. We pause here at the names of the 12 ordinary people who lived in Judea after the time of the Babylonian exile, but before the birth of Christ. Names like Zerubbabel and Zadok and Eleazar. We know their names because Matthew records them here. But we know nothing more about their lives, or their homes, or their professions, or their families, or whether they were good or bad, or everything in between. Yet in knowing their names, they remain known to us. In knowing their names, we know that our names are known to God. For Jesus Christ descends not just from patriarchs and kings, but also from ordinary people living ordinary lives. Each one of them vital to God, each one of them vital to bringing forth the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Today we remember the ordinary people, and we light a candle for all of God's children in this world, asking that we too might walk humbly each day with God. So we come to the eighth light, for Mary and Joseph, because Matthew concludes the genealogy with this. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Messiah. And so we pause here at the names of two extraordinary, ordinary people, Mary and Joseph. Descendants of foreigners and farmers, carpenters and kings, builders and destroyers, faithful and unfaithful. Descendants of the perfectly imperfect people of God. And it is to these humble people, to these misfits from this gnarled family tree, that Jesus Christ is born in a stable in Bethlehem. It is to these beautifully messy people that God is born as Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Today, as we remember Mary and Joseph and all the misfits, we light a candle for all of God's people who continue to bear hope in this world. And we leave one candle unlit as we continue to wait for Christ. Candle for all who bear hope.